So guys, let's get into some geek and potentially conspiratorial stuff. And this about CRISPR. So CRISPR stands for clustered, regularly interspaced, short palindromic repeats. So it's a technique developed several decades ago that's gene editing. So it's really cool. And it sounds like something out of a sci-fi movie, but it's actually legit. So long story short, what it is, I'm not going to describe the whole process, but it's typically used for research with genetic diseases. So we know a specific segment of DNA is responsible for a genetic disease, say cystic fibrosis. We get a complementary strand of mRNA, which will bind to that specific segment. We'll use Cas9 and a couple other, actually tons of other things that come into play. But basically it cuts out, it's like Microsoft Office, or like Microsoft Word, cut and paste. Then you can implement a new DNA sequence that doesn't have that genetic disease. And there's a lot of promising research on it. And they're making some really profound discoveries in this department. Not too many people are working on it, but because there's so much that goes into it. Like just working with rats is huge. So when I was in grad school, we had to, just to work with rats, we had to take a 4 or 5 week course to prep us for it. And you have to learn how to like euthanize and take care of and hold rats, and how to perform specific procedures, and just monitoring equipment, all kinds of stuff is crazy. And then you got to fill out just to do studies, like packets like this big of paperwork just to work with rats. And it's insane. So I can understand the hesitancy or the reasoning behind this. And also there's a lot at stake, but and it's very time consuming also. That's another thing to keep in mind. But it's been mainly used in rats, and it's in regards to genetic disorders. But what this scientist, he's a biophysicist in China. His name is He Jiankui. I don't know Chinese names. I can't pronounce them very well. But what he did was he was editing the CCR5 gene, which is typically responsible for HIV. So what he wanted to do is he took it out of the embryo, 2 embryos, which would grow to be 2 twin sisters. And so he was like, oh, if I could delete this, then they won't be able to contract HIV, which is really cool and really useful. And it also had some consequences that weren't, I shouldn't say consequences, I guess some benefits, which they're quicker to recover from strokes, and they're more likely to further their education. So they go further with education, people that don't have this gene, which is really interesting. But you can't really say correlation equals causation, so you can't necessarily say that this gene makes you less intelligent, but at least there's a trend there. It's really interesting, but come to find out, this happened in February 2019. So just a couple months ago, China proposed new legislation regarding gene editing, and pretty much says that the people who do the research or who perform these procedures on the embryos, because again, there's not many of these tests that are done on humans. It's a huge thing with bioethics. They basically say that the embryo or the person has no consent. So it raises a lot of questions, kind of like animal rights activists say. There's no consent, so you shouldn't be able to do this. I totally get it. But at the same time, we don't have to make these advancements, but they could be a great benefit to society. So they basically said that the researcher, whoever's doing the procedure, is responsible for anything that happens to the person. So I think that's a great step. I'm for limited government. I want the government out of my life in as many aspects as possible. But I think in terms of this, you are impacting people not only that have no consent, but it's huge. You could be impacting their health and well-being, their well-being of life, I guess, their overall wellness, because it could have unintended consequences, because genes don't just specifically, some do, but most genes act in tons of different pathways, and they're responsible for proteins that are in tons of different pathways. And so it's a lot of it's interconnected, and there could be a lot of things, because we don't know the science 100%. A lot of it is guesswork, and it could have negative ramifications. And if you're gonna ruin somebody's life and maybe cause another illness or another genetic disorder by you trying to reverse or get rid of a previous one, I mean, did you really do your job, and did you do the person or humanity any service? I don't know. But the main thing I want to get into is kind of, where does this go? So we all have a utopian sense of how we view things. We view it as one way, right? So CRISPR, we're trying to move in the direction to eradicate genetic disorders. Genetic diseases need to go away. There's no benefit to them. aside from people that work in the healthcare industry because it keeps them in business. But who's to say that it's always going to be that way? Everything that starts off has a goal, and they're reaching for the betterment in one way or another, improving people's lives, making the world a better place. You know, all these big companies originally started with that premise, and all it takes is one bad person and things could fall apart and go in the complete opposite direction. Look at Mark Zuckerberg, for example. He created Facebook, the most widely used platform. I think it's got over 2 billion people that use it, something like that. It's like a crazy high number. And it started off open dialogue, everybody could do whatever they want, and now all of a sudden he's cracking down on things. You can't say this, you can't say that. We have people that moderate. We have algorithms that change all the time, so they're demoting certain content, promoting others. Same with YouTube, same with Google, that's been exposed on Project Veritas and a whole bunch of other places, that they're outright banning content and blacklisting content based on ideology. And that's terrifying. And what was once a great platform, we'll say Google was God, and now it's garbage because they're abusing power and they're censoring, and who knows if there's money behind it or not. I tend to think there is, but I don't know. I don't like the path that goes, and they had a great idea in the first place, was we're going to make a search engine that is going to serve the people, it's going to be really effective, it's going to be quick, it's going to get people the results, and then all of a sudden they shift and they change the basic premise of their entire company from the beginning. And I see that being an issue with CRISPR. It's like the whole free speech argument, right? I mean, that comes down to censorship as well, but as it stands now in the United States, there's essentially no regulation against free speech. You can't dox people, you can't incite violence, you can't yell fire in a crowded theater if there's no fire. The reason that these are in place by law, punishable by law, is because it jeopardizes the safety of others. And so you're impacting the well-being of others, so that's why it's against the law. You can't do these things. But you have places like in Canada with Bill C-16, which is you are forced by government to use gender-specific pronouns of that individual. You're compelled by force by the government. So it's not that you can't say things, you are forced to say things. And who says it stops there? What's next? That's the thing with like these hate speech laws that people are proposing. It's like, first of all, what is hate speech? I would say it's like, if I was to define it, it's speech that is subjectively offensive based on one's indisputable characteristics, such as semicolon, race, ethnicity, sex, gender, identity, military, veteran status, etc., etc., etc. But something that offends you might not offend me. Like, for example, I don't get offended by anything. I don't really care. You could trash me, make fun of me, I don't really care. It's just like, whatever. Like, if that makes you feel better, that's cool. Maybe you're right, you know, like, I'm not perfect. And so when I see people that get super offended by things all the time, it's like, I don't understand where you get off. I don't know why you get off being a victim. But they're proposing this legislation, and then it's like, who makes the legislation? Who determines what's offensive and what's not? Is it all one side, which is what it is right now? It's all far left, I guess, liberals that are proposing these laws. Nobody on the right is. They want free speech. Like, that's it. And it's like, yeah, there's things that you just shouldn't say. You know, you shouldn't call people mean or you shouldn't call people names and be mean to random people for no reason. That's more of like just a code of ethics, a code of conduct that is like unspoken. That's just how, be a nice person. But to compel speech and to limit speech, because in order to talk about anything that's important, you have to risk offending people. And I could talk singly, one-on-one to somebody, and I can have an idea. I could try really hard not to offend people. But what about when it's 10 people? What about if it's 100 people and you're talking about something that's important, or like a big issue, contemporary, or maybe it's mildly controversial? Because this is how we form new ideas. We have debates and open dialogue, and that's how we reach new conclusions, how people have new discoveries and ideas. What are the chances that you don't offend 1 in 1,000 people if you're speaking at a lecture? It's impossible. You're going to offend somebody regardless of what you say. And so I don't like the whole free speech thing, but that's what I'm getting at is there's no limit. It's just going to keep, they're just going to keep setting the bar. And then what happens is there's going to be an equal and opposite reaction, because right now, like I said, it's all far left Democrats, liberals that are proposing this legislation who want the world to be a specific way. What happens when the alt-right, conservative, not even conservative because they're not conservative, alt-right, I guess, identitarians become in power, right? It's going to be an equal and opposite reaction. Same with like this whole impeachment thing with Trump. They have no basis, no evidence whatsoever. All the evidence points the opposite way, but these Democrats keep pushing for impeachment because they lost the election. It's purely partisan politics. And what's going to happen when a Democrat's in the presidency? They're in the White House and the Republicans are in the House and the Senate. They're going to try to impeach the Democratic president simply because of what they're doing right now. That's just how it is. And I get it, there's partisanship in politics, but it's uprooting the founding of our country based on the democratic principles. You're elected in, you serve your time, and I don't know, I think it's very disrespectful the way that they're going about it. But the reason that I brought that up is that there's going to be an equal and opposite reaction, and there is no line for these type of things. And this is what I see with CRISPR is it starts off good, trying to benefit the genetic population, I guess, by limiting genetic disorders. So what happens next? You can edit genes for diseases. What about regular genes? What if they're able to make your baby have whatever eye color you want? What about if they can make your baby short or tall? What about changing the race or ethnicity of the baby? What about if they can influence the intelligence, or if they could do things that affect the psychology of the kid? Which is, I feel like that one's a little less likely, at least as of now, but all the other ones I believe they can do now, or they certainly can do in the near future once they experiment more with it. But where's the line? And eventually you're going to get to a point where, since it's only controlled by a small number of people, they're going to form a conglomerate. They're going to charge money for these services because everybody's going to say, look, I want my baby to be tall with brown hair and they're going to be Asian. I want a tall, brown-haired Asian baby, because that's what you're doing. It's like Build-A-Bear Workshop. You're going there, you're building whatever child you want, despite what they want. They can't make a decision. They're still an embryo, and they have no consent. So you're going to get a huge market for this technology. And they're monopolized. They control the price, right? There's no government regulation on pricing. So it's similar to the pharmaceutical industry. They could charge whatever they want, and it's going to be the rich and the wealthy that can afford it. So they're going to have basically super babies that are the most intelligent, the most attractive. Maybe they have improved metabolic rates, decreased chance of genetic disorders. They're perfect babies. Meanwhile, the poor can't afford it, so they're not getting it. They're eventually going to be like weeded out. And I don't know, that's just the way I see it. They're going to be like, oh, well, if you want to do this procedure, it's going to cost you $20,000 per gene or per baby. And it raises a very good question as far as, is there going to be government intervention? Is there going to be more code of ethics that come into play, or more bioethics? Or I guess another concern that I have is, because people do become usurpacious and tyrannical. This is just the course of history. This is what happens. People in power become tyrannical and usurpacious. And so one bad person gets a hold of this technology and they could change everything. One bad doctor secretly edits genes without people knowing. Or maybe he says he's doing one thing and he's doing another. This could absolutely happen, because look at, was it not Operation Northwoods, declassified, where the government was literally injecting black people with syphilis and gonorrhea, not telling them and encouraging them to have sex. And they infected over 200,000 people or something like that. I don't have it in front of me, but this is proven. They did it in Alabama, they did it in Guatemala, they did it in, I believe, Mali, a whole bunch of places. And nobody knew about it. And then it came out 30, 40 years later and turns out, oops, yeah, we were doing that, by the way. And they come up with some BS reason as to why they were doing it. But the fact of the matter is, they were trying to populate control, and they were also trying to do genetic testing that would, not genetic testing, but I guess testing on disease that would not pass in a bioethics board ever. So I don't know, if somebody gets a hold of the technology and chooses to be bad and uses it almost as a form of I guess bioterrorism, that could very well be the case, and it's just scary. And so similar with AI, we have to move with caution, and there's a lot of things that need to be taken into consideration, because this is a serious issue. And although it could provide a lot of good for millions and millions and millions of people, there are some downsides and a lot of things that need to be taken into consideration. So I know I kind of rambled, made this video a lot longer than I wanted it to be, but hope you guys enjoyed it. Hope you learned something. Hope it got your gears working. What do you guys think about CRISPR? What do you guys think about gene editing? Because I think it's really interesting and it's cool, but there are some things that are really scary that I think could potentially happen in the near future. So I will talk to you guys really, really soon. Peace out.